Hello, and welcome to the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Chrysler. Each episode, we talk to business leaders and subject matter experts to learn about the challenges they've overcome and the challenges they still face. You'll hear fresh insights, real talk, and get inspiration to grow your business. Hey, everybody. So excited to be welcoming Chris Lokken to the podcast today. Chris is with Johnson Financial Group and has been working with employers for over 20 years, tailoring benefit solutions that take the best care of their people. Benefits is an area where many manufacturers struggle and don't always make the best decision. Chris has developed a process that helps employers better understand and get better control of their benefits process. In today's war for talent, it is becoming increasingly important to think differently about your benefits and to keep valued employees you need and to attract the employees that you want. So Chris, thank you so much for coming on the Everyday Business Problems Podcast. Excited to have you here today.
Yeah, I'm excited to join you, David. It's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So employee benefits, right? Probably love-hate topic for many people that are going to be listening to this podcast.
And in many cases, it maybe borders on the H word instead of the L word, right? I've doing this as long as I have, and being a self-professed insurance geek. It's one of those when I made a change from where I started and got into the benefit piece, somebody told me that people looked at them and said, this thing's a necessary evil, right? Well, the longer you go through it, the more you understand sometimes how that can be how that thought process can exist in a manufacturing environment, and in any environment for that matter, when you have a goal to do other things, but we need to take care of our people. So.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what really is the challenge for people is, and to me, it's almost ironic, right? So to me, what I think the challenge is for many people, especially in the manufacturing space, is the fact that it's always changing. It's hard to get your hands wrapped around it. There's a lot of things, kind of from a technical standpoint, right, that you have to really understand and to be able to make smart decisions. And so saying that, what I think is ironic is, to me, that's a great description of what happens in manufacturing. So, in some sense, it's like this, it's very similar yet very different. And I'd love for you to kind of just take a few minutes to talk about, what's the process that you walk through to help people get their arms wrapped around this, ultimately to the point where we are utilizing this to, help retain and attract people, because, we know that's a challenge.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. How many companies have you come across, David, that they started making the product in their garage? Right. In the people in manufacturing, and by the way, that amazes me because I have not a great amount of technical skills. I couldn't machine a billet. I can't nail two boards together all that well. So those things to me I'm envious, to be very fair, of those people that said, here, I just thought of this and I just started doing it in my garage. I was working for somebody else and all of a sudden I've got X amount of employees, right? Yeah. So I think in the manufacturing world, you've always figured out how to solve a problem, how you come up with a solution. And that solution's always been to do it to come up with something that doesn't exist before, or you streamlined and modified a process to be more efficient and more productive at that. I always think of the thought process of lean flow, right? How many times I go into a lot of boardrooms, right? And it's lean flow time because there's this part and over here, all the way to over here. And sometimes they have to go like 4 times, right? So they've got Post-it notes all over it. And they've been sitting there talking about this one particular piece that they manufacture, their process, all of those kinds of things. So in manufacturing, it's always seems to be the art of the possible, right? But when it comes to this, in the benefit piece, a lot of times that technical aspect is not quite there, right? Again, we go back to that kind of that love-hate relationship that we let off with. And so what we really are trying to do is talk about that. You don't have to know, you don't have to necessarily know everything about it. What we need to do is always bring it to you in things that you understand. And I think the biggest part of this is, and again, depending upon the size that you are, some of this is a little bit more workable than others, but it's not impossible in any stretch of the imagination. I think you have to start with managing what you want to measure, or measuring what you want to manage. You can go back and forth with regards to that, right? Is what is happening out there. Obviously, there's a cost, there's an effect on your P&L, there's employees who have families. If you make certain decisions, they may be affected. So the dollars and cents really matter, but it's really understanding what is happening in our organization. And when you go to really high performing manufacturers who have that process down, it's amazing how much more successful they are, right? That's that lean flow concept. That's that ownership concept. I'm going to say lean flow gets talked about a lot, or Six Sigma, those types of things. But I'm also going to say you don't get that without culture, right? Your people don't want to help you. You won't get there. So again, it's kind of managing or measuring what we want to manage. So we start really with data. What is the data telling us in your program? Whatever data we can get. Sometimes we have to go get that data. That may be getting everybody in a room and just asking questions, right? That's the easiest way to do it. And whereas the larger your plan gets and the more sophisticated you do things, you get as much data as you want. So again, it's really starts with that data process. And then I think, it's where are those areas where we're feeling some challenges, right? 51% of people, David, in the last 2 years in a recent study sacrificed food to pay for their healthcare expenses. And these are people that have benefit plans through their employer, right? So where is that pain point? Is it obviously there's always the fact that this is an investment by a company, right? But it's also a fact of what's happening to the employees, because as we've tried to keep that investment by the company at some level of a manageable number, right? Now, when we talk about manageable number, we've been living in a world of 6 to 8% inflation for almost ever in benefits. So when you look at what we're talking about today about supply chain and scarcity and all of the supply and demand factors that are driving the price of everything else up, we've been living this in healthcare and benefits for 20 years, right? So as they've tried to keep it stable and kind of put the puzzle pieces together, what we've done is we've taken and increased employees' cost sharing, whether it's a deductible, or if you want to go to this doctor, you're going to pay more, right? Those types versus this doctor over here that maybe is a little cheaper or something like that. So we have to look at where those pain points are inside that data and go, okay, what do we want out of that? And what does success look like? And again, what I'm going to tell you is bring that back to your culture, right? Bring that back to your culture, engage your people. Maybe not all of them, usually the best people to engage are the people that usually are the ones that like to complain the most. Those people have a really good set of opinions. Because interestingly enough, when those people find something that has resolved some of their concerns and challenges, it's amazing how they become the cheerleaders for you in your organization, because you're not on the shop floor every day, every hour, every minute, but they're kind of driving that needle a little bit more. And then really what we kind of try to do is work to then try to customize and build your plan so that it is taking on some of those challenges and what your employees are looking for. And at the end of the day, it goes back to, I have to quote him on this because he's a very good friend of mine. He has a great shop, and a gentleman by the name of Matt Guzzi from MRS Machining. Start small, fail fast, learn quick, right? It's not perfect. This benefit stuff ain't been perfect for a very long time, and so the process to get back there isn't perfect in its own right. So that's, that's kind of the whole technical piece of it from the benefit end. And then really what it is engaging and communicating, keeping that flow up of communication. What happens in a lot of companies, we look at this from especially manufacturing. It's like, we just replaced a part on, machine 6. Okay, great. It's going to run perfect now for a while, right? That's the way we think about this. Okay, great. We got this all fixed for this year. Let's have a nice meeting in the lunchroom. And then we talk to people for 45 minutes and they don't understand 90% of the stuff that comes out of my mouth. And then we send them home to tell all the wonderful people in their family what it's like. And I would say 50% of the materials never leave their vehicle until they cleaned it out, right? So it's one of those where you need to really start to figure out how you're engaging and communicating around it and educating people, because the healthcare system is remarkably complex here in the US. And there is lots of what I'll call areas of inefficiencies, right? And that lean flow that is not there, right? If you know, so that's a pretty, I think it's a pretty good overview of it. So
yeah, I mean, it was really amazing. A lot of things to, to unpack in what you said. I mean, the one takeaway that I have from it is, and I never really thought about benefits from that standpoint. So just from the straight up process standpoint, because, I would say typically, whether we're talking about manufacturers or really any other vertical, I would say typically that, it is that set it and forget it kind of mindset, right? To your point, you make all the decisions, you get somebody in there, they, unpack all of those decisions for your team, and that's it. Let's talk about this next year. We're out of sight, out of mind. We already did this. Let's not go through this anymore. But I really like what you said about how you guys attack this, because when you look at it from the process perspective and take the approach of, the continuous improvement mindset and understanding that there's going to be changes on both sides, right? There's going to be changes from obviously the infrastructure perspective and what's available and the plans and all of that. But then you've got all of the internal changes because people get married, they get divorced, people have children, all of these different life events that happen. So there's changes internally as well. And really kind of taking that partnership approach and making sure that the communication is there to understand, what's happening with all the people that are utilizing these benefits, not just to the decision makers. Obviously, those are, important as well, because it's going to impact your financials from a company perspective. One of the other things that I'd love to kind of get your perspective on is, I think that there, especially today, because our, healthcare system is so complex, I think that a lot of people have almost a roadblock in place where they think, well, this is for much bigger companies. My company is too small to get into this. And while there are, I'm sure differences between there. I mean, can you talk a little bit about, the scale on both ends of that, as far as what you see and why this is still something that smaller companies should be looking at, investigating, understanding what their decision, what the possibilities are?
Yeah, well, I will say it has evolved. We could sit and probably talk. This would be about a 3-episode podcast of, what has changed in the last 12 years, right? There's a lot of, there's been an increased amount of regulation, first of all, especially the smaller of a company you are. What I will say with that is this is not a discussion one way that was right or not. This is a discussion about every situation creates people to think differently about it. And I would say that, so for the smaller companies that have been out there, there was kind of a path that was set in that space, but there's a lot of alternative paths that have developed as a result of it. When we were looking, I don't want to get too deep into the technical of it, but you could traditionally you bought this from your United Healthcare, your Anthems, which is Blue Cross Blue Shield in a lot of states in the United States, or a Blue Cross Blue Shield plan, or you bought from the local HMO sponsored by the hospital or whatever. But what you were really buying is you were sending them a check and they were taking the risk. What has happened is there's been a significant rise in the area of alternative funding, which typically, while there were exceptions to the rule, a lot of employers that had less than 50 employees had no really avenue to self or do alternative funding. So that's kind of splitting up the risk a little bit more, the employer taking some of that risk, and then having a little bit more skin in the game, if you will. So so kind of that pathway though has developed for smaller companies, and what we're seeing is that's a significant share of opportunity for solution providers out there. And what we're seeing is it started being much more of kind of a maybe more of a canned type product that comes off the shelf. And while there are still many of those available, what's happening now is we're actually getting the opportunity to customize plans down to as much as 10 employees, right? Where we can say, hey, we understand that you've had a $5,000 deductible for years. We're going to give you an opportunity to have a zero deductible health plan. Really? You're going to have to do a few things to get there, but they're going to be things that are going to support your engagement, your education, and your knowledge of the healthcare system. And then you do the right things, we'll waive your deductibles for you. Whoa, okay. So when you look at that, those types of opportunities now are coming on board for pretty much anyone at this point in time, which is kind of funny when you're the smaller company. Usually most people in smaller companies want to grow. So, and if people are listening to this, that's probably why they're listening to you, because they want to grow and scale, right? Well, how do you get there? If you can be able to keep the talent as a result of having an outstanding benefit package, you can now compete with the 200, the 300, the 400, the 1,000, whatever that looks like, because bigger ships sometimes don't turn as fast, and you got to be thinking about that. And it's when you talk about that process, you also have the ability to engage with people at a better level. I'll use Starbucks as an example. Starbucks, if you go and poll anybody at Starbucks, I'm going to assume this will happen because maybe that's changed a little bit with the pandemic, but you go anywhere with Starbucks and say, why do you work here? Well, we have great benefits. When we actually take the Starbucks benefit package and we run it through all the fancy insurance geek benchmarking and some of those metrics, they're probably in the bottom half, right? But when it comes to satisfaction of their benefits, they rank in the top 5% in a country of satisfaction. So what is it all about? It's all about not only maybe doing some things creatively, again, start small, fail fast, learn quick, but then also making sure you're talking to your employees and keeping that communication. Communication is essential. And by the way, if you've got 40 employees, it's a lot easier to communicate than when it's 400, right? So you have that ability to do that as a smaller company. So what I always believe is kind of the whole hardware store theory, right? How many times on a Saturday morning, David, have you gone to the hardware store, right? Did you believe you needed a drill bit? No, you didn't believe you needed a drill bit. You believed you need to put a hole in something is what you needed to do, right? So ultimately, the tools and the resources we use, they're only a part of the solution. And ultimately, the solution is getting that, being able to be that employer of choice, right? And being able to, when the company down the road gets a big government contract and is putting now hiring signs out and paying more for talent, and you've got this great group of people that's helping you scale and grow at your level, how do you continue to compete? And that's how I look at it. So
yeah, I mean, that's really smart. Super interesting too on the kind of Starbucks factoid.
yeah.
And it speaks to a lot of what you've said, so far throughout the episode, and it's so different with the operational improvement things that I talk about. It really does come down to communication, culture, kind of as I would say, looking at yourself in the mirror sometimes when you're in that leadership position and taking some ownership of the decisions that have made to that point and future decisions that you want to make. So talk a little bit about from your experience, Chris, because I feel like, in that maybe sub 50 employee category of business, that there could be some hesitancy to, take a proactive approach on the benefits side from the attracting and retaining standpoint. Because again, I think a lot of businesses in that size, at least from an employee count, they're looking at P&L, they're looking at their cash flow, saying, hey, this is money to grow. How can I, go and spend the money on the benefit side? Yes, I need to hire people. Yes, I need to keep people. In your experience, how have you seen companies kind of attack that and really utilize it to, to their benefit? Because I mean, I see the benefit of it. Sometimes though, I feel like it could be difficult to get leadership on board to understanding that benefit piece because they're looking at it from a different perspective. What's your experience been with that?
That's a there's a multi-layered question on that.
Well, feel free to start at any point in there and unpack it.
I use this. I always use this line, and it's going to sound really, really weird, David, but it's how many pancakes does it take to shingle a doghouse? And it's all depends, right? So
I like
dog,
that. That's
how big
I
the
learned
house
a new
you
one
want,
today. I like that.
how big are the pancakes? What kind of flour did you use? What kind of nails are you using? I mean, again, so, but I would say, when we're looking at this, we already believe that if companies have made an investment in benefits, they're probably spending too much. Okay. When we talked a little bit about those different structures, right? There is in one structure, you're just writing a check and they're taking care of everything. And as long as they don't not do what they say they're going to do, they're going to keep taking care of everything. And they're going to say, hey, let's continue moving forward. This is what you look like. Here's your financials. And then we're going to move on. So in that environment, yeah, and I will say that there's probably, you're giving up some unit cost there to purchase a program that probably isn't optimized for what really is happening out there in our system today, right? And I go back to those kind of pain points I talked about before. Employees don't really like the time when you say, hey, we're going to have a meeting about this stuff, right? They don't like that time because they're scared, one, because they think, guess what? It's changed every last 5 years, right? Which that's totally happens. And the problem is you're also looking at it from the P&L side of, we've been paying more every year. So ultimately what we're doing is we're really trying to take apart those dollars. And while we're not maybe going to spend a bunch less in this approach, we're going to look at it and try to say, okay, how do we better deploy the dollars that we have more effectively on our behalf? We're going to cap our risk a little bit, but we're going to take a little bit more risk than what we were doing just sending the check down the road. And by the way, this is not a funding discussion. You can actually, I believe, impact your culture, your employees in a very positive way. And it doesn't matter what funding structure that you do, but ultimately your greater opportunity sits in trying to figure out how do we use the dollars we have and try to keep those dollars consistent, because you can budget for consistent dollars and a lot flatter trend line than this, right? And that's what that trend line looks like. And please don't ask me to predict what that trend line is going to look like when we start to factor in the fact that the CPI is up how much it is today, and gas and supplies and all of those things cost more money, right? but because that's a little bit of an unknown right now in our space, right? So, but if I can try to, in that environment, if I can stay flat, now I'm able to absorb more of those interesting supply chain pricing pressures that we have right now in my other parts of my business. And what I do as an employer, if I don't have to make changes and I create something that's really, really good, I and everybody else around me moves, and usually they're not moving down, they're moving up.
Right.
I'm now a little bit better collectively in my area, where I'm looking to recruit talent, and if you're doing it, you've got 10 different facilities all over the country, it's a little bit different discussion, but it's that's kind of how I see it. We're not investing more, we're just investing what we have better. How did I do?
It's, I mean, yeah, great. So I would say from that standpoint, it definitely answers, where my mind is at with a lot of the, owners and leaders that I talk to, specifically in the manufacturing space. And I would kind of maybe put a softball out there for you on the companies that haven't invested yet. So they don't necessarily have dollars allocated. But what you said in there, I think there's a way to get people to understand the value, because you're spending the money. It might just be in a different bucket, but you're spending that money, right? Whether it's attrition, I mean, you're spending the money, I think would be my takeaway on it. So I'd love to get your takeaway on that for people that maybe haven't invested and are concerned for all the reasons you just
Yeah.
brought up. Like,
Well, and okay, I'll dial that back a little bit, David, because it's some days I sit around and think about, why do I even have a job? I have a job because at the end of World War II, the government put wage freezes on things and they couldn't give people more money. People bought, if they the Blue Cross plans started after World War II, basically, and you could pay a few dollars. Actually, there was at one point in time back in the 1800s, a lot of the what I'll call missionary hospitals in the Midwest, many of them still have saint in front of the name, would be the nuns or the brothers or whatever that would go out. They would go out to like logging camps and they would sell medical cards for $5 a year, right? And they would provide you all of the treatment and things like that. So it existed before that, but it wasn't really until post World War II. So sometimes you sit there and go, how did we get here, right? And what I'll say is that we work with employers that it's cash. It is cash is the king, and they don't necessarily need to do some of those things. What I will tell you though, what we've learned is you need to communicate. Again, this is why we're doing this, right? And I think you need to also try to find and meet people where they are, because one of the things that's an emerging trend is financial wellness. Based upon the data and the information that I see almost every day right now, we had a financial wellness crisis in 2019. We had a financial wellness crisis all through the pandemic, and I think we're now in a wow moment in terms of that financial wellness piece. So people need to know, okay, you give them $3 more, but how are they going to spend it, right? Budgeting, sources of places to get maybe refinancing, those kinds of things. There's a lot of different things you can do in that direction. So when you're coming back to it, it's not just about offering a health insurance plan or a dental plan or a vision plan. It's really trying to figure about financial wellness. And the other thing is people have realized is we're a lot more fallible than we were. Like there's a lot less bulletproof people out there today. We're not, and you and I we're not in college anymore. But it's one of those things where that is even in younger levels than ever. They're starting to go, wait, what about protection financially for my family, my income, those kinds of things. So you need to you can do some things over there that are remarkably affordable. And if you talk about and you engage them around the purpose and the reasons why, and you use your culture to drive it, you can have some very, very good, what I'll say, I always use the word stickiness, right? They're going to be sticky to you, right? Hey, you did this for me. I appreciate that, right? But the problem is, I think we get so focused on, hey, we just got a huge order. We're going to be running doubles, and we're going to be running all the overtime you want. And you're going to have to come. Somebody's going to have to come in on Saturday. Somebody's going to have to come in on Sunday. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
We get so focused on that. Sometimes we don't sit down and go, this is why we do what we do for you. Right. And help them. So again, a lot of it comes back to that communication, and you don't have to go and say, hey, we're going to do this, because there may not be a reason for you to do that. I could go, that's probably another whole podcast on the reasons why, but I mean, but there's a lot, I mean, it just may not be what your unique situation is. And you got to understand, goes back to measuring to manage, right? So.
Yeah. No, I love that. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not talking about it. It's no different than, again, the stuff that I talk about with people. At the end of the day, there will be people that are completely turned off, to the idea. And that's definitely not the group that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the people that are open to the idea, but can't necessarily wrap their mind around, the investment piece, or how do they start, those types of things. And so I love what you brought up about the emerging trends. I know you just talked about the one, but I mean, that to me is like just another piece of how do you attack this, right? Like, how do you soft launch? How do you get the conversation started? It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go from 0 to 100. Right? Like, you can offer some things, and by, engaging somebody like yourself, I mean, that's how these conversations can start. And yes, down the road, when you feel a little bit more comfort with it, when your people, have an understanding, and you have some of these conversations, not only will I feel like that company be better prepared from an impact standpoint, to, again, retain first, but then ultimately attract people to help them in their, in their growth trajectory. So,
yeah, the sad part in who we're kind of talking about here in the manufacturing world is, what's the biggest thing that everybody wants when they run the national studies? They want flexibility.
Yeah.
Kind of hard when you got to ship 10,000 units by 4:00 on Friday.
Yeah.
Right? Flexibility is a little bit more of a challenge. It's something that, but that's where I think kind of bringing this a little bit more to light and educating and building that culture around it helps you in this space, because your ability to send everybody home and let them do meetings via Zoom. Sorry, it's not, that's not how this works here,
Exactly. So. And I think flexibility, like, just generally is going to mean different things to different people. So if you're not having the conversation, you really have no idea what that really means to your group, so again, just kind of to hammer that home, making sure you are having these conversations, and engaging a guy like Chris that can help you to have these conversations, because, in some sense, it's always interesting. It's like, there's so many similarities between the things that, that we do. It's completely a different, thing that we're ultimately selling. Right. But the thought process is the same, because a lot of what you have to talk about is the mindset, is the communication. Those are the basis, the building blocks upon which you can do the rest of the really cool things that you can get to with both of these things. So, Chris, as we kind of wind things down, I'd love to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about any final thoughts that you have. I feel like we are literally like just scratching the surface, and that we could have an entire series on this, and totally open to that, by the way, if you are, because I think this is such a great topic. And so it feels very unapproachable for a lot of people. So love to continue the conversation. But, beyond that, for right now, if you have any kind of final closing thoughts, love to hear them.
First of all, thank you for just giving me the opportunity to talk about this. And it's great. I will say the biggest thing that always kind of gets in the way here is when knowledge is low, fear is high. This is a process. And I think a lot of people who do what we do don't look at it as much as a process. They look at it more as a transaction. I'm not the only person that probably looks at it a little bit more process oriented than transaction oriented. But I think that is really where I think the value, and to make it a bigger part of what you're doing is to kind of move on from that. And again, we're not in the sprint of a process business. We're in the crawl, walk, run business. So ultimately, it's not going to happen overnight. But if there's, again, if anybody has any thoughts or questions or anything, we're certainly there to answer those. And we just appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. So.
Yeah, and I will make sure that all of your contact info is in the show notes as well. And yeah, thanks again, Chris, for coming on the podcast today. Again, super enlightening. I would say my final word is, if you're talking to somebody in this space and you feel like you're being treated like a transaction, time to look for a different advisor and make sure that you reach out to Chris, because he's a solid guy and has amazing advice and is very approachable. So please reach out to him for conversation. I guarantee you won't be disappointed in at least meeting and interacting with Chris and asking him some questions. Almost guarantee you're going to walk away with some value there. So on that note, Chris, thanks again for coming on the Everyday Business Problems podcast.
Awesome. Thanks, David.
Thank you so much for listening today. If we brought you any value, please rate, subscribe, and share our podcast. Also, be sure to connect with us on social media by searching @The Chrysler Club. Until next week, I'm your host, Dave Chrysler.